So guys, tonight we're talking about likability in Dynasty, but as always, let's get started by going over a trade. So Scott, we have a 12-team Superflex PPR, 1.75 for the tight end, start 10. Are you going Pickens in the 108 or Puka Nacua? Go ahead, man.
Start 10. Likability, we're going to try to hit the definition of likability. What does it actually mean when we're talking different players, different picks? Would we do certain trades just for likability? How does that actually factor in? So with this, I'm looking at likability and the assets that are here. So there's 3 different assets. I'm obviously giving up the leverage if I'm giving up the 2-for-1, but I'm also getting a player that is probably an elite asset. I do think there's a little likability issues when it comes to likability for Puka versus the other elite receivers. I still don't think he holds the same clout, but I think in this case, if you're trying to save up your money to buy a big purchase, this is a pretty good price. The feedback that I would say if you not want to do this deal right now would be really do an analysis on what else you can get with that 108. What other deals could you possibly get done with these 2 pieces? But I would guess part of the value you're getting here, Shane, is that somebody's willing to do this trade. Like they're willing to accept the 2 pieces that you want to give them. They're not saying, well, instead of Pickens, why don't you give me your 26 first? Or why don't you give me this piece? And it feels like you're getting a credit for a receiver here that's probably a first round value on top of the 108 versus having to give up other flexibility. So I'm okay doing it. I think I'd take the Puka side just because there's a very limited window of being able to move George Pickens in a deal better than this, to be honest. So I think you're getting a little discount by being able to move 2 things that I think are very hard to move on their own.
Shane, where's your head at on this? And again, it's a 12-team Superflex PPR, 1.75 for the tight end, start 10.
I don't even know if this is particularly close. Like I smashed the Puka side. It's got to bring up the fact that Puka doesn't get the respect or the clout that the other elite wide receivers do. But I think that's more of a draft position thing, like the same way it took Amon-Ra St. Brown a couple years before people went, all right, this guy's elite. I'm just going to admit it. I think that's the situation with Puka, that and staying on the field. So, if he can get through the rest of this season and then, 4 straight games next year without getting injured, I think he gets that respect. I've tried to move or tried to get Puka Nacua in many leagues, and I would not been able to do anything like Pickens in the 108. I usually get like, do you want to give up A.J. Brown in a second? And no, I do not want to do that because I'm giving up the same tier of wide receiver, even if he's a little older, and then I'm giving you a free second. So no, I don't want to do that. If I just have to give up Pickens in the 108, I'm fine with that. Now, I know the 108 would have been a really good pick this year, apparently, from what we're seeing, but that's not always the case. The thing about likability that comes to mind, it feels like it's the insulation that doesn't exist anymore, right? It is insulation because there are certain players that get forgiven. We were going to talk about a couple other players, but I feel like Puka is one of those players that he would be forgiven if he did have a bad 6-week stretch or something, right? If it wasn't due to injury. It wouldn't completely tank his value as some other players would. If George Pickens goes out there, for example, since we're talking about him, and has a 5-game stretch where he's just a dog, not a good dog, not the dog in the chest meme,
a bad dog.
But, bad dog, not a good dog, but a bad dog. People will tell you, well, I never thought he was elite to begin with. And that's what people will say, where I don't think that's the case with Puka.
Well, it's interesting because both of these players have missed chunks of time in 2024. So we've already gotten an idea of what they would be worth or how they would be in demand when they're unavailable. And obviously Pickens down the stretch wasn't available, but when he went out and it was like, he's probably going to miss most, if not all of the fantasy playoffs, what could you have moved him for? Whereas Puka, okay, yeah, he had the serious knee injury. He went on IR early, but when he came back, it didn't take much for people to buy back in, right? So it was almost like when you have the example when they're unavailable, meaning the right now does not matter for either player. And even to the extent the pick doesn't really matter right this second because we don't really know what that 108 is going to look like. But I think that's where likability comes in, is essentially if X happens, what else can I do while I'm waiting for X to get back to whatever it was before? And some guys have that, some don't. Some bounce right back. As long as they show they were close to what they were before, it's completely forgiven. People don't even remember Puka was injured. It's like he finished strong. He was dominant. He was clearly the best player on the Rams, and he ends the season like that. Sure, there's going to be some that go, he's injury prone, but generally he has the clout to get right back to where he was. And he doesn't even have the same clout, like you were saying, as some of the other elite receivers. But I think that's where likability comes in. It's not even how much do people like him right now? Because guess what? If George Pickens rips off 4 games next year in a row where he's getting a 30% target share and he scores 20 plus points, people will like him. And then when he's not doing that, what is the likability in that moment? And you got to really look at it outside of when a player's just smashing for everybody. There's a lot of players that people don't like, but they go, yeah, this guy's really crushing every single week, so I'm just going to have to pay the market price for him. And that's definitely how Dynasty has changed, but it makes me really start thinking about this likability idea before I even make a draft pick or acquire a player, is really be able to think through, like, what are the scenarios and what may I need to do with this player, and am I going to be able to do it? The worst thing you can be stuck with is an asset for like the rest of an offseason where you just can't do anything with. It's suspended. There is no demand to even get 70% of what you think it's worth. It's inflexible. And that's where I think likability really comes in.
So we're always looking for some kind of edge in Dynasty, right? And we don't want to be too arrogant saying, hey, we know this player is going to be better than that player. So we always want to draft assets. We want to pick assets. We want to pick players that people like. Like Shane, take Lad McConkey, for example. A lot of fans. There's a lot of Lad fans out there. He is a likable guy. He is a likable player.
To me, it's a player that even if they don't do well, they'll be forgiven. At least you'll have a time to move out on them, or you'll have a time to get out on them. You have more than one out, right? You don't have just production. If they don't produce, you're going to be able to trade them. That's how Lad McConkey was, because there were people that really, really liked him. Part of it is that he's a white wide receiver, and people, it's like a novelty. You know what I mean? It's literally like a white tiger. Is that a thing? Is a white tiger a thing? Yeah, sure it is.
There's Siberian tigers.
Yeah, them. It's, it's this novelty. So it's almost like people want it to do well because you don't see a lot of them. So you're like, oh, well, it's really cool if we get one of those. So people are looking for a reason to like. So again, by that same token, they're going to look for a reason to forgive them if they don't play as well. So likability, though, like most things, is kind of it's a made up thing, right? Would you consider Antonio Brown a likable person, human being? Like, I don't even think his family likes him because he's a scumbag. He's a piece of shit. He's a terrible human being. And we knew this about him when he was a football player, when he was still playing. But guess what? I really liked his fantasy points, so I would live with it, There's been players that have done some really heinous shit or been accused of some really heinous shit. And guess what? They've been viable fantasy assets because they could play. So likability had nothing to do with it. So I think likability probably has more to do with, like, and I don't mean to call Lad a fringe player, but more of a player that's not on that elite scale. Like Puka, it's more than likability, right? It's the fact that he also scores 18 points a game as a wide receiver, right? I'm sure there's many, many fun wide receivers like Puka. Like Ben Skoranek seems like he'd probably be a fun story, but he scores 0.5 points per game. So we don't like him as much because, well, he sucks at football. So I think the most important thing first is this player actually any good? Are they at least a fringe player or better? Because if not, it's not going to matter if someone likes him. That will plummet. Now, is it a tiebreaker? Is it something that you should use as a tiebreaker when you're making a draft pick? Should I maybe have gone, instead of drafting Xavier Legette, maybe I should go get Lad McConkey, because people already don't like Xavier Legette, but they like Lad McConkey. So if Lad McConkey smashes, even if I still don't believe in him, I can move him. Xavier Legette, his only out was he had to produce out of his mind to maintain any level of being an asset, and he didn't. Lad McConkey did, but even if he hadn't, even if he'd just been okay, his value still would have held. Say he had Xavier Legette's season, I guarantee you his value would still be higher than Xavier Legette's right now because people like them better coming into the season.
Scott, I'm going to turn it back to you, but I also think about likability. I mean, it doesn't have to be a strict definition, obviously, but for me, likability also has kind of a lottery ticket aspect to it. Like, you like a highlight reel player. Like, I'm thinking of George Pickens, for example, DK Metcalf, players that have likability in that they have highlight reel potential and they can spike. They are a live asset. That is the thing. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I think it's actually way more complex than we're probably given credit to in this video. I mean, everyone's mentioning Lad McConkey, right? Lad McConkey could go out and have 30 points 3 straight weeks. Brian Thomas does the same thing. He's wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. Lad McConkey, it still might be a little unsustainable. Like, there will be narratives regardless of the production that exists. So I'm trying to kind of get to the bottom of what does likability mean, because it's not just a good profile or good draft. Quentin Johnston had a good profile. and was a first round pick, but he was dead on arrival. Many other guys, Jameson Williams, doesn't matter what he does in year 3. If he's good, doesn't matter. You forget about everything else. So if you just think of those two players, one, if you look at Quentin Johnston's stats this year and compare him to Jameson Williams, not hugely different. But in terms of who do people like and who do people not, that has nothing to do with production, right? It is at some point the QJ profile, and there's many others in that mix, they just lost any sort of desire, likability, whatever you want to call it. It just didn't exist. So if you can identify those players, those are ones, because here's the thing. We play a game where 95% of players are going to have ups and downs, right? That's the nature of the game. Which ones during the downs can you still do stuff with?
Exactly.
That's the key. Which one, when they're in a slump or they're not getting used the way that you think, can you still go, you know what? I can go out to my league and I can sell somebody on the what could be, or I can sell somebody on what was, and still get credit at the time when I want to cash in the ticket. I love the lottery ticket example, right? It's more of a fluid asset though, because it goes up and down, and rarely does a player go to complete zero. But the key is in the down times when maybe I want to move that player to something else, or I want to get out for a pick, or I want to package it in some other trade. Likability for me is what can I do with the player in those moments? And to Shane's point, some players are completely defined by their production. They're not producing, nobody wants them. They are producing, everybody wants them. And the likability part about their name or their character or their profile doesn't exist. I think it's key, especially when you're talking younger players and prospects, to capture the ones where you go, this guy hasn't done anything, but I bet you if you saw a great game or a couple great plays from like Jalen Wright to end the season, going into the next season, people are going to go, I loved what I saw. And that's a player that could go from worth nothing to now he's somebody that between the end of this year and the rookie draft, you could probably package or you could get something else for. There's other running backs you could go, it doesn't matter what they do. They are what they are. And that's the likability component that's very hard to measure. And sometimes you can look at like keep trade cut, or you look at trade trends with players. But I think it's more than just, their production or their character. I think there's just bias. I mean, that's why it's very important over the next couple months. Pay attention to what other content creators are talking about, who they're mentioning, who their favorite sleepers are, who the guys that you need to be on the lookout for. And it starts with even big NFL draft media. Who are they talking about? Who are their puff pieces talking about how, this player did this despite start crafting those narratives now, because it is going to spin into Dynasty. You're going to be on the clock and you're going to go, Clay, I need to make a pick here. I can't trade out of this spot. Who do I take? And when you get to like the late second, even hell, the early second, late first, at that point, you're almost looking at, I'm not really sure which one of these players is actually going to crack my start 10 lineup, but it feels a lot better if I have the one that people just go, well, even if Michael Penix doesn't play, people liked him. They like how he got his points in college. They like some of the highlights. They like his arm. And then all of a sudden he takes over and doesn't look awful. All of a sudden you're like, wow, people like him again. Like he's the next big thing. Yep. So really think about that before you make picks, because it's about survivable assets. The worst thing you can do is blow a first round pick on a player, and a week later you go, I can't even get a 27 first for that same player today, because people just don't really want him.
Shane, would you say that Blake Corum was likable or is likable? Talk to me about Blake Corum, because he still can be packaged into a deal and is seen as having some value.
No, I would not consider him likable. I mean, here's the thing, right? So people also stop liking players because they didn't do what you thought they were going to do. So the popular narrative, at least there was a popular narrative that I helped perpetuate, that Blake Corum was going to come and take a chunk out of Kyren Williams' workload, because Kyren Williams can't stay healthy and he fumbles all the time. Kyren Williams stayed healthy. He did continue to fumble all the time. He also wasn't very efficient, and he wasn't good in the passing game. But you know what he did? He scored a bunch of touchdowns. So he scores at a high rate. People like him. So guess what? Blake Corum, he got no run. He got a little bit of run. But if you liked him beforehand, I think you only liked him because you thought he was going to take some, like I said, some work from Kyren, or you like that narrative at least. And now that he's blown your narrative out of the water and made you look silly, a lot of people are going to dislike him. Like he personally had something to do with your narrative being wrong, when really the only thing that he had to do with it was he was the player that you were, going down narrative street with, instead of looking at stats.
Think about that though, because you ever heard, we all went to science class, right? With every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right?
Yes.
Murphy's Law.
Is Kyren Williams any more likable than he was 12 months ago? I don't think so. So
No.
if
no,
Blake
yeah,
Corum
people-
is
yeah,
not
well-
more likable, then Kyron Williams should be more likable. But
No,
it's
Kyron Williams is more likable. I guarantee you he is, because you know why? Because he stayed on the field. Because there is this thing that we love. We love underdogs, right? And he was a 5th round draft pick after running a 17.3 17.4 40-yard dash, which is a whole other conversation because he was a really productive college player and a lot of people liked him up until that 40-yard dash, and then we all hated him. Everyone hated him. I don't want to hear anyone jumping on that anyway. But now that he's overcome that, and like I said, this year, he took away the fear that you had that someone was going to come in and take his job. Well, guess what? Now I like him even more. And he had some island games, and I got to meet his mom apparently on Monday Night Football. So now I like him even better. Well, not me personally. I mean, not me personally. On Monday Night Football, they were like talking about his mom and stuff. You know what I mean? For some reason, people care about that stuff. Like they care about these players as humans or whatever, and they do get attached to them. So when they start getting like that kind of national recognition, people do glom onto that, whatever the saying is. I don't know, but that's what they do.
Isn't the key here, though, the reason Blake Corum had likability is because the player he was sharing a quote-unquote backfield didn't have a lot of likability. Like
Right.
Blake Corum's likability only existed because of where he got drafted and the likability of the other guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had nothing about him that was special, that was good. I mean, hell, he actually should have been into the NFL earlier than he was, but he was a little bit of a disappointment in college early. He got an early injury in his career, and you're like, okay, he's decent, but his likability started simply when he went to a team that has a less likable running back in front of him, right? So it's not just Blake Corum himself or his profile or his draft capital or his landing spot. It's literally some of these other narratives that we craft around their situation. It's no different than a receiver being more likable because he went to a team that has a quarterback that people like, and vice versa, right? Like there's receivers I can name, and the only reason people chased them because they were on this team with this quarterback and this coordinator. That's it. They had no standalone likability, right? They go to another team. They go from the Bengals to the Colts. They're irrelevant.
There's zero.
Like literally there is zero likability. So I think it's important. It's important to identify when you think a player has likability or doesn't. Why is it? Is it situational? Is it profile? Is it production? Is it other guys around him that people just, I mean, there's receivers that go to places and everyone just hates everybody else on the team. So this guy has to be likable because we hate everybody else. We hate every Patriots receiver. So Jalen Polk is likable. So we start creating the likability out of thin air. And then you go, okay, why didn't the Jalen Polk likability survive past a month? Because it was like, well, the one reason he was likable got blown out of the water right away. And then it's gone. It doesn't survive like somebody else. So I think it's important to identify the why. Like, why is this player likable?
Yes.
And go through the reasons.
Because
Sometimes
is the why sustainable? Yeah, exactly. Does the why have any weight?
You know what's a good indicator for is someone likable? Throw legitimate stats out on Twitter, Blue Sky, Reddit, TikTok. Do your TikTok dance while you're spitting it out, or take your shirt off. I don't know. However you get views on TikTok. Spit out legitimate comparisons to what that player did and what other players have done. Spit out legitimate facts. Just facts. Not even making a determination. Just something like, I don't know, like Anthony Richardson's EPA per play is the worst in 46 years of football, right? If people start chirping at you that you don't know football, that you're a nerd, that, well, somehow you're both things. Somehow you don't know ball from an eye perspective, and you also don't know stats, or you're a stat nerd. So it's whatever. Those are the players that you know are likable, right? Like, I just always bring them up, but I kept getting smacked around for Jameson. Like, that dude could have went out on South Street and shot someone in the head, and I would have just said, hey, Jamo shot someone in the head, and someone would have told me, I don't care. I'd still go up a second round pick for him. Because that's what it was. You throw legitimate stats out there with you don't even color it, right? You don't even put your opinion on it. You're just like, here's a stat and see what people say. You'll find out if people have if that player has a likability factor or not.
Scott, what about likability of picks? We're going to be coming into rookie drafts at some point here. It's sad that the point scoring season is coming to a close, but could we also see the likability by just seeing how the draft picks are being moved around? Like if people are already kicking back to 26, or if people are packaging up their seconds to move up now Talk to me about the likability of picks and how we can track that.
I think with picks, it's probably more of a range thing or a tier thing. Like you can get a pulse on the likability of picks that are going to be in this range. And ultimately that does come back to players. You know, if you start listening to content right after the season, people will have kind of their tiers and their ranges of, you know, well, I'd really love to get as many picks as I can between the 106 and the 110. And that's usually based loosely on a set of players or a subset of players that they expect to be there. But I do think you can get some general likability data on just draft picks in general in your league by looking at, you know, throw out a pick that you have on a block. And basically you have to be open to, you're going to get some offers where people will go, yeah, you know, I don't really think this class is that good, but I figured I'll just send you Josh Downs for that first. And you're like, yeah, it's not really what I want to do with it. But I think you can get a pulse on kind of ranges of likability. And I think it starts with probably, I don't know, the 105, 106 in most classes. Feels like the top 3-4 picks, they're already spoken for. Person that has them has a plan for those. And generally, if you have a top 3, top 4 pick, you're probably okay with however things shake out. Really, the class starts to shape up in terms of what can I do with everything else? How valuable are the seconds? How valuable are the thirds? How valuable is it in certain formats to be able to get into the draft and just take shots on players? Certain classes, it's great for that. Other classes, I can remember some rookie drafts where I didn't even want players in the 4th. Didn't even want them. And then there's other classes where like there's too many players. I can't get enough of them at all. So I do think likability of picks, it's more, I think, broad, but I also think there's always ranges of like, okay, I know a bunch of big names in the space have said, man, you really want to get as many picks as you can inside this tier. That starts shaping the likability of how the general dynasty player is going to view the class even early on like this.
All right, so you're about to see a video pop over top of Shane's face that I think you'll enjoy. Give us a like, hit that subscribe if you'd be so kind. See you next time.